this one, and the reason why I ask that question, Zabatine, is at the moment the split began actually, funnily enough, in LCS with all these weird benchings, right? Where it's not just like a player who is bad at the game, that's an obvious reason to bench anyone in any sport. It's basically players where they're actually some of the biggest names and arguably some of the best players for these teams. It's also spread a little bit to LEC, like we've had SK Gaming, and now there's the whole Vitality thing where they swapped in a few players. But I want to get your take as someone who was actually a coach in LCS, because I want to start on the NA side. This is going to be mainly an LEC episode, but I thought in light of your coaching history, it might be interesting to get your take. So what do you actually think about this? Because as I even alluded to there, if we look at the difference between the LEC and the LCS benchings, the LEC ones seem to be more based around like literally performance. Like this guy isn't doing well this week and we're going to bring in this other player, or we have some reason why, the team isn't working out. The LCS one, I've noticed, it doesn't seem like almost anyone except for insiders actually know even the real reasons. It's always like a different reason given, like, we felt like this guy should be promoted, or maybe this guy's having issues that mean he can't play. Like, when you were over in the region, listen, those two teams you were working with, Optic and Mortals, obviously they had their own periods where they benched a whole bunch of players, or one player came up and down out of academy. What would you say about the whole topic? Like, why do you think, for example, Zabatine, that it's like a big issue now? In the past, maybe it was at one or two people. Seems like a lot of teams are kind of flexing the bench angle now. What do you think? Why is it such a phenomenon, do you think?
I think, aside from Team Liquid, which is a very specific case, I think that the teams that don't belong to the top already know that they're not really belonging to the top. They're trying to experiment, and I think the problem is it's very hard. I think for as I mentioned sometimes, especially in my French shows, that it doesn't really encapsulate into a vision that's provided by the team to the audience. And people are very surprised by everything that's going on because they just like watch teams kind of, flipping players from academy to main team and vice versa all the time. And they feel like there is no continuity. I think when you're behind the stage, you really want to try as many options as you can. And you're always trying to find a way to make it work one way or the other. But I think that I made this mistake personally in my career of thinking that switching a player might actually, kind of recreate a dynamic or make a team do better. But usually, except if you change the whole team, and you just start something fresh, it's effort, putting efforts, especially on an individual basis, whether it's the staff, whether it's the players, usually fix problems in a much deeper way than actually just switching, a player. Except if you have this performance justification, like your academy, top laner is insane, winning every single side of every single matchup, then you just put him on the field because he's better. But if it's a matter of team system, I think that work with the individual works better than just a swap, because if there is a problem and you bench a player because there is a problem, it's he's already affected by the problem because he's not winning, and then he gets benched, and then the audience doesn't understand, and then it just snowballs. So I don't think it's not easy for staff, because I don't think that it's very time is a resource when you're working 9 weeks in a straight. But that's definitely something that needs to be addressed for the the future generations of players. We have a bunch of rookies and want to develop talent. That has been the main topic for LCS in the last 2-3 years. That's how do we individually follow these players in a way that with the back and forth and in their performance, they will feel like they're developing. And for the ones that are established, when they have to give their spot to another one that's probably better, how do we communicate that to the audience in a way that people understand that it's a vision coming on the long term from the management and not just something that comes out of the box every 2 weeks or so? I think that's a big problems I see.
Okay. You have any thoughts, Wicked?
So I don't really think the change is necessarily bad. Some of them have my own opinions, right? But we don't have all the information because we're not behind the scenes. So from my perspective, I don't know if they're bad or good, but my big problem is the communication, because the communication ruins it for the fans. They give us absolutely nothing, so you have nothing to even take at. And then the players, it also hurts their reputation a lot, right? And if I was a player on a team and I got benched, but the reason wasn't said and people were making 1,000 different speculations, I would suddenly lose confidence in my team, because I'd be like, what's going on? You guys look like a clown organization to some extent, right? So I have a big problem with the communication, and I think that's something NA teams really need to focus on, because it's going to hurt the fans, it's going to hurt people watching the sport, esports, and it's also going to hurt the players and the team in the long run. So I think it's really, really sad the way they're doing it. And I think the best way to do it is give a little hint of the truth, give a little bit of the truth, but it doesn't have to be the entire truth, right? You don't have to air all the laundry out, but just give a little bit of the truth. I think Excel did a fantastic job. I think almost all other organizations that I've seen in recent times did a terrible job.
Yeah. But to pick up on what you're saying there, I definitely agree with that, like the latter point. Like, I actually think I can tie both points together, which is the point that Zabatine's saying here, where they don't really, like, the orgs are doing a terrible job of communicating basically what, like, the premise of the team is supposed to be. Because what I would describe it as is this, right? It's very different if you, this is how I can tie the 2 points together. I agree, actually, by the way, XL did a great job with how they announced it. Like, they didn't basically say, like, well, this Dan guy can't do X, Y, and Z, so he's kicked, which would obviously ruin his whole rep, and everyone would just think he was dead. And then also you imply that, like, you know, it was impossible to fix with that player. What you do instead, because I've noticed Youngbuck throughout his whole career has done this, like famously when he was on Fnatic, even though I know he didn't think Broxah was even close to the best jungler, his way of explaining how they would work around that and what the flaws were, it never sounded like he made Broxah the problem. It was like, we have issues with how we communicate with the lanes and the jungler, you know, like in this situation. He would make it like vague enough that he was giving you the real story, like he was telling you what the problems were, but in a way that, as you say, it didn't like make it so that like the idiot fan was like, oh, it's just this player can't do it. Because if you think about it, right, if you actually just say, essentially, the team concept was we were going to play in a certain way and we're having a problem with this area of it. We can't get this certain aspect working. If you make it vague enough like that, but you are still giving real reasons, it doesn't have to be that the player that was removed is actually a bad player. He might, like, for example, maybe in your team it turned out the jungler has to communicate more and you actually have one of the best junglers. He's just not a very vocal player, or he's a player who prefers to take feedback rather than get. Well, in that case, he could be a very good jungler, just not for your team. Like, I actually agree. I think that's part of where it all comes from, by the way, is in the past, I think people probably would have just sort of said, fuck the player, and just sort of said, yeah, we're having these problems, which in the short term takes the blame off you as the org, because fans are like, oh, he's just not a good player. But I agree. Unfortunately, it's going to mean a lot of players are going to kind of get labelled a certain way, and in LEC case, they might never get another chance. And I know a lot of coaches and even pro players at the moment are like a bit nervous about that topic because they've seen too many people come into LEC or be in LCS and basically get benched after like a split, half a split, and then you see these names never come back. And sometimes whatever the label is, toxic, can't communicate, can't do whatever, nerves on stage is a classic one. If you get labelled with that, that can last years. I mean, here's an example, right? Even though he wasn't benched, when Abedage first came into Schalke, in the first year, because people were wondering, well, he's not really as good in LEC as he was in ERLs, a bunch of people on his team said stuff like, oh, well, he's a little bit more introverted, you know, he's not as communicative. Dude, that has continued to this day. Like, I actually have tried asking some people who've been in teammates, and they're like, oh, no, that was years ago, you had those problems. Like, but a fan who doesn't know that, like, the story got updated, they think, like, you know, he's just a guy who never talks ever in the game, and, you know, he's having all these same issues. So, yeah, I think it's a super complicated topic, but I can certainly see why some of the issues are coming around. What do you think on that, though, Zabatine? Because I think Wicked addressed it pretty well, but I know that is what a lot of coaches are going to tell me. They're going to tell me, like, oh, but I can't give any info away, or, you know, if I tell people what I'm trying to do, they can guess things. I kind of agree with Wicked. You can sort of give, like, a hint of it, right? Without like, betraying your strategy or what you're trying to do in the team. Like, you're not really, like, the other team knows the scouting report, surely.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have two cases, right, where you're gonna bench someone because of underperformance. Like, you clearly someone that's not performing well, and you don't have the time to treat the issue on time for the next match, the next week, or for your performance deadline by the end of the split. And you're just gonna swap someone that's like fresh and ready because he's just performing probably on par, but works better in a shorter term. That happens. That's the worst case because you don't really have a communication besides, I mean, at this very specific moment, and it's something that my A player is not providing, and you don't want to go on, you know, facing the public and saying that. And you have the other one, which is much easier to communicate around, which I think is probably the case that Wicked is speaking about, which is like, oh, you have a specific system that you don't want to disclose fully, but you have found probably like a way to play that's better. Like, for instance, I don't know, you have a top laner that wants to play with all the resources, and then you eventually recognize that your team is working much better if you play around the bot side, and you have on the academy a top laner that's going to play much more around the without resources, not playing, like, the team doesn't need to play toward his lane and stuff, and then it works. But then you have a positive communication to say, oh, we found out that, you know, the chemistry works better, and we have a better expression of every single individuals in that system and stuff, and it makes it much better. I think the first case is the worst because as an organization, you have nothing to say besides, you know, we are short on time, and that happens, I think, to any coach you will get here. It's like, we are short on time. We saw that it works slightly better with someone from the academy. Want to try him and want to see if it works, if it transitions from scrims, because it works on scrims obviously first, if it transitions on stage. But there is nothing you can do besides saying, oh, this academy player is performing pretty well, we're going to try him. And people are like, oh, so the other one suck? No, he doesn't suck. He's not performing on par. with what we expect him to do, or he doesn't feel like performing at this level, or the meta doesn't fit him that way. But it's very hard to communicate that, because anyway the fans will transition into translate into, oh, the org says the players suck, which is not right.
Mm-hmm.
That's my POV on it.
I think in that case, what you could easily do, like, let's say you're like a 9th place team, like what are they called, FlyQuest right now? Then I think one thing you could do is like, yo, right now we're in trouble. It's not looking very good. We need to be top 8 for the playoffs. If we put in this player, we think our chances are slightly higher, but it's not a big difference. So we have to make this roster swap just to try and make playoffs or something like that. Because they're still giving the kind of truth in the story of they want to make playoffs. So they're trying anything they can try, right? But I feel like the latest news was simply just like, oh, it just happened. And you don't get anything at all, right? And then everyone's just speculating everywhere.
I mean, I've been facing it last year, this situation. Like, we talked with the management in my situation in Immortals, and we just had a plan going into the summer split. So it involved a lot of roster changes that, like, the audience, like, didn't really understand, and I understand why they didn't understand that. And I mean, heading into the week 2, I mean, the whole management decided that to part way with the current state of the team. So I got laid off, and Keaton as well. So it kind of transitioned into, oh, okay, so I got recognized for picking, this team, and then they swapped the whole rest of the roster. So obviously, like, I mean, a huge part of the information there is missing on how it got, like, prepared and stuff during the off season. And from the outside perspective, it just doesn't look good for everyone, And I think, for instance, this year it's much better because, as I was mentioning off, it's like the fact of putting Pretty for one game and saying, oh, we're putting him to give him time because we think he's performing very well. I think, for instance, the communication between last year, not putting me, I don't care, like, it's what's done is done, but I think the difference in communication is perfect, Like last year, it was kind of a mess and nobody really knew like what was happening. And this year, it's like, okay, the lineup is moving for this very specific reason, for this very specific game. And after that, we just switch back to normal. We just want to reward the well behavior of our academy player. So I think teams are learning from their mistakes as well, but definitely there is like a huge gap to close in terms of like communicating around the weaknesses of players, not making it look like they're unable to overcome them.
Sure, I agree with that.
Yeah, one thing actually I would add on to that is something you said earlier as well, where you were talking about like the idea that if it's just a flaw, like with the overall system, whatever you're trying to do is the concept, and it's something minor, but it's what the reason you're losing games. I definitely agree that like the idea that you just take a player and you sort of do label him in your mind, like, right, he's the reason it's not working. You take him out, you add another player, and you just imagine that somehow this player, who, by the way, in line with what you're saying, has had no time working on this problem, he's just walking in fresh, that just fixes the problem. Like, here's the thing, it can happen, certainly. Like I'll say in my home game, CSGO, that's basically the way you fix problems, like you just change players because it's an open circuit, there aren't poaching rules. If you have the money, you have the money. But I would even say in that game, it's actually, that's the extreme version of it, because think about it, in that version of a game, you don't just replace it with any random player. You probably buy one of the best players in the world who does exactly what you want. Well, you can't do that in League of Legends, like, especially not during the season. That's just not an option. So one thing I do think is a bit weird is, in my opinion, when you wait halfway through a whole split, and as like we're saying here, like, maybe you see your team's not going to make playoffs, then you do the panic swap. That's like you just take out a player, maybe even a big name player, or you just throw on a player in from academy. Like, that almost to me is like you're admitting you haven't done a good job as a coach. Like, if you're the coach, as long as you're not a million miles from the premise, wouldn't you rather keep working with the person who's been there for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, you know what I mean? Because to me, if it's a massive, massive problem, the team's probably not going to do anything in playoffs anyway, even if you change one player. If it's a minor problem, you add to the work you've done. Like, maybe this next 1 week of going through the hard times fixes it all, and now you have the awesome team that presumably you thought you had at the beginning of the split.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, you have a very good example, I think 2016 Splice, where they just changed the support. They go relegation in the spring split, and they change one support. Nisbate is out, and Mihix arrives, and then they go to World. So sometimes one player is all you need to kind of like cement the whole pool of talent within your team. So you're gonna have good and bad cases in every single situation. I feel like what I'm very leaning towards, like what Wiki is saying, which is trying to phrase it in a way that it doesn't paint anyone individually bad, because I think that's a swap, an unplanned swap within a season is a collective failure. From the staff not being able to develop the player enough for him to perform and maintain like the atmosphere of the team, for the player to not have the work ethics or not knowing the work ethics enough to maintain his level or adapt to the patch or something. So it's always a collective failure, and I think it's never good as an organization to just direct all the blame towards one person or one sub part of the team, and try and I think that teams need to learn to own it a little bit more, in a way that players can find another chance after they get benched. Because a lot of players, especially I think in ERLs and in LEC, it's even more prevalent because there is much more rookies. Like the amount of rookies going in and out of ERL is gonna just skyrocket, because for instance LFL, like the French league, is so competitive at the moment.
Sure.
There are gonna be a lot of players that are gonna just jump into the LEC, and after a few weeks the management is going to say, "Oh, okay, we're just switching back to other older players." And if there is no if the teams are not owning it, then it looks terrible for everybody. Like for instance, like the Vitality case where they pulled Saluatus SLT, which is he was a rookie, was playing in ERL. They switched him in for the early part of the summer split. They were winning and losing game, it was fine, and suddenly they just brought back their top laner from the academy, which was their main top laner on the spring split, saying, "Oh, the guy in the academy is performing extremely well." The point is like, what about the rest? How are the pieces connected? What happened? What's the direction? What's the vision? You have two young players. You're just switching them in and out. We don't really understand. And they got a huge, it's not even like my opinions. They got a huge backlash from the community.
For sure, yeah.
Because there is no explanation. Like, what's the vision? Like, which one do you want to keep for the next 3 years?
Yes.
That's where I think it needs to improve.
I even think such a case, right? You have a perfect situation where you could be like, "Oh, the champion proofs from Sagenda fits our comp better, and we don't want to play around top lane as much. We haven't played around top lane, so this fits us better." You don't even have to give much information out because that's obvious to everyone. Everyone can see it, right? And like there's been situation, even look at the C9 situation where Sven got benched or set out, and then King was in, and then suddenly the management comes out, the coaching staff, one part of it, comes out and says, "Oh, I don't think Sven will play this entire split," and then suddenly Sven is back. Like, what's going on? These kind of things are so crazy to me, and it's one of the reasons I don't want to watch C9 games now.
Yeah, it's just this. I mean, that's something I say to a lot of people within the industry that are not like owners of teams. In any league, you have 9 losers, right? That's how it works. So losing is the most likely outcome of your season. And if you're not winning anyway, like making 6th or 3rd, or at the end of the day, except if you go to Worlds, there is no like big outcome. Like you just go on holiday like everyone else. And I feel like it's much better for teams to sell a vision. That's what I was just like trying to mention at the beginning of this talk, is just try to sell the vision to their fans in a way that no matter what the decision is made, the fans feel like it's part of a process that's been thought ahead. And this will justify as many decisions that it needs to be taken to reach the goal that has been like shown to the fan or thought in advance. But the problem is we feel like we've just the ups and downs of like just the daily life of a season. Management try to adapt as if they're buying and selling stocks.
Yes.
And it feels very uncomfortable for the audience saying, "Oh, okay, we're just shorting and then we're buying this one and we're shorting."
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you're in this situation and you're day trading or week trading your roster, you're usually not the team that's going to win it all at the end of the year. Sure. It happened, but usually it doesn't. So that's where maybe take the L, cater to your vision, and keep doing it. I think, for instance, one of the Thieves made an amazing job by buying the roster that was growing, keeping it steady, reinforcing it really steadily, and now they're in a position where they're actually beating the OG teams that felt like nobody could beat. Just with a very proper strategy that they started 2 years ago. Even their academy last year, Tenacity, all these guys, the scouting that has been done by Kelsey back then, the vision that has been like thought by Papa Smith. There is a lot of things that are behind the stage that you can clearly show. If you're a fan of 100 Thieves, you can be a fan of Nature and all the content creators. But if you like the esports side as well, like you feel like this team is having kind of a steady management toward a goal. And when they had to kind of like, go at the bank and get a little bit, maybe spend a little bit more to get this whole roster from GG that was the most growing one, they just got it. And usually it's C9 that gets the growing roster in NA. Yes. And this time it's 100 Thieves. So I think that's kind of like this improvement is not only communicating, but it's like giving to their audience a vision that they can cater to, even if it's like, "Oh, we're going to be 10th. It's fine, guys, we're going to be 10th, but we're helping NA trying players that will never get a spot in and fans maybe will like it. But this day trading feels very odd for everybody.
I've got another take on this as well, by the way. I want to open as a potential topic, which is I also feel like I'll be very cynical here, Zabatine. One of the reasons I also think sometimes coaches and orgs don't come clean with like what they were thinking is I think some of them don't actually have like a coherent plan from day one to the end of the split as to what they were trying to do. I think a lot of them do come in and it's like a day job. It's like, right, I've got these players. Here's how the meta is at the moment. Right, we're going to do these practices, see what works, boys. And it's like, and to me, that actually is also where some of the coaches and the orgs need to step their shit up, because one of the questions I have is, right, when it's again, if we're not talking about like pure player underperformance, like obviously, if I'll give you an example right now. If you recruited Kiri for this split, yeah, you're probably not very happy with how he's performing. Like you thought he was going to be a lot better than this. He's kind of hitting a lot of the games. He's probably just going to get replaced because he's bad at the moment, and that's just the way it is, right? It's nothing to do with anything extra like this. But I would say this. The people who recruit him have to ask themselves, what was I thinking when I recruited him? That has to be part of the process. Because one thing I can't handle, Zabatine, is there's a lot of people who are coaches and GMs in some of these teams that are recruiting players as it's like not possible to check on their history, or it's not possible to test these things. Like when I'm making the concept of the team, how my team's going to play, if, for example, I'm recruiting, so I'll use the example of SK Gaming. If I want to have a jungle support duo that's like, really great at shot calling and understands macro concepts, well then, if I want that, I've done a fucking terrible job if I was the GM of SK Gaming. Like, I don't want that guy telling me after one split Zabatine, like, oh, but I didn't know this Tinks guy was like this. Well, then you don't know anything about fucking League of Legends. If you'd gone to the RLs and you'd asked the people who played with Tinks, you'd asked even the people who were bigging him up as a player, they said he's a very good player in a certain sense. On certain champions, in a certain playing style, he could be good. He was never billed as like some mastermind. Also, he was only playing with fucking Yellowstar in the RLs. Probably, by the way, the most like notoriously amazing shot caller Europe ever produced. I'd maybe put like Mithy on the same level. Like these, when you played with someone like that, like you have to assume that that's having an impact on them. So when they don't play with them, they're not going to be as good. Like to me, I think some of these orgs have to take like. Here, I'll give you an analogy very quickly. There was a legendary football manager from the 80s and 90s in England. It was called Brian Clough, right? And what he did is he took a load of teams that on paper should never have really been like contending for the championship. And not only did he win what would have been the Premier League, it was called Division 1 back then, he also won the European Cup with these teams. And one of his amazing details of how he used to recruit people was exactly what I'm talking about. He didn't go and try and recruit the best player and then go, right, how, like essentially, here's the analogy. He didn't do what G2 did, which is like, right, we've lost an AD carry. Who's the best AD carry? Well, the best AD carry is Reckless at the moment. So get Reckless and, we'll just figure it out. Like, we've got so many good players, it'll work somehow. What he would do, literally, Zabatine, is he would, like, very cynically just say, right, in my team, for example, this is a real example he used, I want, like, a midfielder, and I don't need them to be really fast. They don't have to be able to dribble around anyone. They don't have to be able to score. All I need is, like, a holding midfielder, a guy, like, controls the midfield, links up with the defensive part. Like, so what he would do, no joke, is he would go out and get, like, some 34-year-old, like, Scottish guy who, like, everyone else thinks is washed, but he just looked and saw, oh, that guy can do exactly what I want. And he would just bring people in that sense, because what I'm trying to set up here is, at least if you come in and you know that the person can do the things you want, it might still not work, but you've got a good starting position. I feel as though a lot of coaches are almost acting like they're the school teacher and they're just getting a bunch of bright students and they're going to teach them how to play League of Legends. Like, what do you think on this, Zabatine? Because I know a lot of coaches might have a different perspective to me, so I want to see where you come down on it.
I think that there's a lot of truth in what you've said. I think that, for instance, I mean, if I take my own experience, I think that the way I've been scouting and recruiting in the past, I mean, I haven't put enough time into getting it to the microscopic detail of like what makes a player clutch or better, or the way the play side. Like, for instance, when I built IMT last year, I think that, for instance, one thing I've kind of overlooked, putting all the constraint of availability of players, money, management on the side, right? Just I'm gonna put about my own flows. I think that, for instance, I've tried to put a team where my mid laner is going to try to get rid of his laning and try to project himself towards the sides. But on the top lane, I had Soaz, that was kind of a player that wanted to play for the team and play at some point in the game. And then my bot lane was not like, super heavy, like getting all the resource on the map and trying to win the game solely from the bot lane. So I had like 3 very serviceful lanes with Xmedi, that's a very serviceful player as well, and eventually everybody was very clever about the game. But when you were watching our games, it was like, some games you felt like, there was the idea and the movement on the map were not the problem, but there was not that like this very specific idea about how you want to play the game, how do you want to win games with the players you're gonna recruit, and that has been, like, I mean, you have to take ownership of the things you've done wrong, and I think that's it's not. And people will criticize me for picking AK, for instance, but I don't think that's an AK problem. It's a me problem of, if I pick AK, I need to find a system where I can actually express his main key strength as a player, and I think that, of course, what you say is true, right? But no, I'm gonna just include another dimension into this. Is like, it has to come not only for the coaching staff, but as well from the vision of the company above. And for instance, what the FIV have been doing, which is extremely good, is they've tried to invest a lot. You remember that the year that they invested on Bang, and there was like this whole team, and like, I mean, you import Bang, it's a key player, and they actually didn't win. They didn't worse in 2019 than they did in 2018 spring, when they had Milios and stuff. So what it shows is they switched vision and were like, okay, we're gonna just play it patient and try to go for like growing players, and when I try to have this play style, and when they saw the GG team and they got it, I think they made probably one of the smartest moves I've seen the last 3 or 4 years in LCS, because instead of assembling team, because you're in NA, you have the visa issues, you cannot try out people, like this is impossible with import. That's impossible. Like, if someone tells you like it's possible, they're probably lying, or they have a super system that nobody knows about. So because you can't try, the best thing you can do is getting something out of the box that you can just refine, and it's exactly what they did. So I will give you this. I think it's very important, and if I ever do a coaching job in the future, that's something I will always remember. It's the mistake of just trying to put players position per position, and not having a kind of a steady vision of like what I want to do, when I want to win, and how do I want to win, which are the two main question you need to answer. And your management as well behind you needs to back you, and understand like, oh, when are we gonna win? And they don't come after week 4 saying we're 10th. Yeah, but because it can be part of the process to be 10th for a certain amount of time. Like GG, for instance, they don't really look to win. Like, they had a winning roster, they just swapped it. At some point, you don't seem that GG wants to go for for the first place, but they're doing a favor to, I think, the ecosystem to some extent. So that's where I think what you say is very true. Is you need to have, as once again going back at it, you need as an organization to own a vision, and have the people that can scout, people that like profiles that you need according to your main coaching staff that doesn't have the time to do that, and kind of recruit and train players that cater to your playstyle. Otherwise, you sell them. And then you have kind of a play style, and fans can relate to, oh, okay, I'm playing for, I don't know, like TSM, and TSM is the team that is playing with like their superstar ADC, and I'm always gonna play toward the ADC or the mid lane or whatsoever. That's I agree with you on that point, yeah.
I think something very smart you said is also about the company. One thing I think is, when you get a coach, it's very important that the coach knows exactly what kind of position he's in. Is he actually a coach that got control of the team, or is he just a puppet that's just there because you need to fill a coaching role, right? Because there have been the past where there's just people that needed to fill the role, and it wasn't really that important who it was. For example, I had a Dota player as a coach at one point in Elements, I think. So it does happen, but I think it's very important. And I think if a company doesn't back their coach, then why do you have a coach in the first place, right? Besides just requiring to have one.
Yes. Yeah, and on top of that, it's like head coach is a position that's very misunderstood from pretty much everybody in the industry, whether it's staff. Like, the people that recruit head coach don't really understand like the job. And usually, like, even the definition of a staff is so flexible from one team to the other that it's very hard. Like, the expectations coming from the companies are usually very unrealistic. Like, I was alone on my first year, and I would never work alone, for instance, ever again, because it doesn't make sense. And you have staff with 20 people, and you're like, you are more than for a soccer team. So organizing this whole workforce and making sure that everybody caters to the vision that the company has, with the timeline allowed by the I would say the ownership of the team, is super, super important. And I feel like as a previous staff, you don't always feel like it's the case. But when it does,
he was sort of complaining, like they haven't fixed the lighting situation at certain parts. Right, you had a take on this where, like, you said kind of two things. Like, one was like basically like that you can wreck your eyes, right, those stage lighting. But then secondly, you said that you thought it was just like a misunderstanding. So give me your thoughts on this, Wicked.
So the idea is that obviously it's something that shouldn't be happening, but I don't know how Perks complained about it, right? So I don't even know if he pushed the issue a lot. If it's just like, oh, the stage lighting annoying me, can you fix it? If that's the only thing that's said, it's not really a big deal that Riot didn't fix it, right? He needs to push hard on that. And he needs to be like, this is actually bothering me a lot. Please fix the lights. And personally, I've never really had any issues in any teams I've ever been on because Riot have always been accommodating. There was even a time where they turned off 2 of the lights for a team because it was annoying for our eyes, right? So they turned off the lights due to height differences and so on. It wasn't annoying for other teams. And that was nice, So Riot seems to be very accommodating. I believe Riot, and they say they would change it, and they think they messed up by not changing it fast enough. And I don't really think there's that big of an issue. Besides, Perk should probably have pushed harder unless information comes out that he actually did.
I will say, just for clarity, because I think he himself did a follow-up tweet, he said something like that in LEC, kind of like what you're saying. In LEC, he said it never was an issue and they sort of would fix that if you wanted. But so he was implying maybe it was like an LCS difference or something. Do you have any thoughts on this overall, Zabatine? Because the thing is, right, I will say, one thing we should probably set up is, if you're a fan at home, you've never been in that situation. You don't know what those lights are like. You don't know what the stage. So as a result, it's very easy to just have an opinion either way, right? Oh, it's terrible. It's good. Like what would you say on this topic, Zabatine? Because I know it sounds like maybe players are just being petty complaining, but I think it's a legit complaint if it's really an issue you're having.
I mean, Riot vow is players' experience first, right? So like players need to be satisfied. I just feel like on this very specific issue, I know that management has a direct link to like the Riot games in terms of anything you want to ask, right? Like they have a direct Slack channel when they can ping the Riot. So it's very hard because if there has been if the issue has been addressed by the management of C9 that's very competent, saying okay, we have a player that's complaining about the lights and this thing has been transferred to the production and nothing has been changed, then it's on Riot. If the process hasn't been followed, then I mean it's on C9 and Perks. I mean, it's a small issue. I just feel like, this is very minor and it can be fixed very easily because as far as I know, I feel like Riot is very, very good at working with teams when you're into the facility. Like I've always been treated like a prince when I was like working with Riot games.
Yeah,
I actually have a couple of... Yeah, go on.
No, I just want to say that's the exact same experience I have. Like, they treat you extremely well. There's nothing there. And I think this is just a misunderstanding or not brought up properly, or it was a failure from their side. It can happen. And they even apologize for it, so...
I have a couple of takes on this. Like, one is, like, as I alluded to, I think, unfortunately, if you're a fan, you really can't understand how annoying that can be. Like, I also have, like, sensitivity in my eyes. I'm not as bad as LS. I don't have to sit in, like, a fucking dark room all the time getting surgery every 6 months or whatever. I can say it as his friend, so fuck him. No, but, like, it just, basically, if it's been, like, a lot of hours, it definitely fucks with my eyes. I have to use, like, key lights now when I do these shows, for example. So I will say, as someone who used to do the CSGO events where you might be on camera, like, 12 hours in a day, it's not just that you're tired from working. Like, those lights definitely fucking, like, it sort of wears on your eyes if you've been on stage for more than an hour or so, I would say. But the other angle that actually I think a lot of fans wouldn't know, and I can say this from the CSGO world, is, believe it or not, the actual issue might not have had anything to do with the lights. It might have just been the cap issue, believe it or not, because I can tell you an interesting detail, which is in CSGO, it used to be totally allowed on stage setups to wear a hat if you wanted to. Like, a lot of people wore one of those, like, baseball caps, a bit like what Perks had, except usually, I think he had, like, the one with, like, the sort of circular brim, whereas obviously you'd have more like one of those like 5950 like hip hop style hats would be probably more common, right? But basically in CSGO we actually banned them from stage setups for a lot of tournaments. Like famously, if you know the player, the Brazilian player Taco, who won 2 majors, he used to wear one all the time. Now I will say he did wear it because he had like pattern balding, and he was starting to go a bit bald on top, so he obviously didn't want to look like he had a little patch on his head, did he? Which is, listen, it's unfortunate, but here's the problem, right? So he was the one who famously complained when they banned the caps, like, oh, why are you doing this? And I think he even tried to do some mad angle, like, is it because I'm Brazilian? Like, yeah, we just did all this because we hate Brazilians, mate. That's right. We banned hats on all stages in the whole world because of Brazilian. Like, yeah, get your fucking head out your ass. But anyway, here's the point that guy didn't know, though. It turns out, this is one of the reasons why I bring this up, why it might actually be relevant. It's not as simple as someone saying, oh, well, the light's too bright, so I'm going to wear a hat. Because what we found basically was that most stage setups, I know League of Legends isn't like this as much, but in CSGO, you're trying to generally make it so that there's not too much like sound leak into the person's ear. Like in CSGO stage setups, for example, we use those helicopter headphones, which block most sound, and we pump white noise in, so that in theory, you won't like hear like, someone shout something in the crowd or whatever. Well, what people didn't know was, if you wear a hat, it can sometimes slightly lift those headphones off your ears a tiny tiny bit and sort of break the seal on your head, as it were. Like, most people will know this, even if you just have like the headphones I'm wearing now, which are like those Bose ones that can do sound cancelling. They're actually even designed just the way they fit around your ear to make like a little bit of a seal almost, even if you don't have the noise cancelling on. So I know it might sound obscure, but believe it or not, actually wearing that hat like that could actually be considered like a mild form of cheating, basically. So I thought I'd just throw that in there for fans who aren't aware. Like, it's way more complicated than people realise. If you've never been in a stage setup, there's reasons why they do things those way. So okay, right, let's go on to some actual LEC topics now. So you actually addressed one earlier, Zabatine. You actually had some insight. I want to get into this. So let's go back to that topic. You just gave it as an example for replacing people, but I want to ask about this exact Vitality move, where they've taken SLT, who to most of us, like, I didn't watch him in the RLs, mate. He was just a guy who just played in the RLs and suddenly he's in this team. I actually found him being added kind of a bit weird, mate, because to me, you already did these massive mid-season moves with Southmid and Leader coming in. So to me, it's like, I can't believe they wanted to throw a third person in the mix and sort of fuck with the variables even more. But they did. They benched Zagenda, put him back down to the academy squad. But now, as you say, it hasn't been that long. And quite frankly, this is a question I have for a lot of these teams. What were you expecting these rookies to look like? This is the first split they've ever played. It's the fucking summer split. Like, it's not even like at the beginning of the year where everyone's reset. Like, I really wonder what some of these orgs, like, how good do they think a rookie's going to be? So anyway, they've taken this rookie, they've put him back, even though, as you alluded to, Zabatine, the implication when they signed him was almost maybe they're building around this guy for the future. You know, maybe he's supposed to be there for 2-3 years. It's actually Southmid that's on the short contract, if people don't know. He's the one that can potentially leave at the end of the year. And then when they bring Zagenda back, this really ties into that topic before about like weird messaging. Because the messaging I took from Vitality when they benched Zagenda was that the Zagenda project's failed. He wasn't as good as he was in ERLs and we don't want him anymore. So to bring him back, and then as you said, almost imply it's because of how well he's playing. Something about this whole move doesn't add up to me, or at least it's very poorly messaged if this is really what they think, in my opinion. So, Zabatine, do you have any more thoughts on this? I mean, coming from the French scene, I wondered actually what your take would be, because a lot of people outside the French scene, basically, it's kind of like a black box, because obviously everyone's just speaking in French, so we don't really know, like, you know, what the connections are within. Like I didn't know anything about this SLT, guys. So do you have any more thoughts on this one?
I mean, I think SLT is a very good player. I mean, I don't want to compare players because...
Is
he supposed to be a carry player, by the way?
I think he can. But I feel like he was going steady. Like his improvement was steady in ERLs, so it was a huge gap. And I think that few players will actually close the gap and stay in LEC. Either they have a mindset that allows them to actually express themselves regardless of the stake and the pressure. You have players like Elioya at Mad Lions. Like this guy has every prerequisite in terms of attitude. You see him even in interviews. He's behaving like someone that's gonna stay and is leading the position. Like he's leading the jungle meta in LEC, for instance. But for instance, I'm working personally with Vitio from Misfits since last November, and I can tell you that even within the route of a rookie jumping into the LEC from ERL and being a very, very talented player, there is a lot of setbacks. Like there is a million of setbacks that he never thought of. And I was like, yeah, we keep in touch because all these minor issues are going to happen to you, whether it's losing, whether it's going to be a bad scrim, whether it's going to be a bad discussion, whether it's going to be a Reddit thread, whether it's going to be your coaching staff asking you a question, whether it's going to be just living in Berlin. Like it can be so many things that happen within your life that you haven't thought about that I faced because I was managing these players in LA, and it's kind of the same. And looking back at it after like a split and a half, no, like Misfits is tied first and he's performing very well. He agrees that there is so many things that a rookie will have to face and is not prepared for. And I think that's the role of the management of the teams to actually make sure these hurdles are not preventing the players from express themselves at the level they're able to. And I think, for instance, the Vitality situation has been kind of the opposite because I don't think that by doing what they're doing since the beginning of the year on the top lane position, they are giving a chance to whether it's Zagenda or SLT. And I'm not even comparing the players. I don't think that any of them understand what they're supposed to do. And that's my biggest take on it. Is like, this what Video wrote on Twitter, on French Twitter, for instance, is like some teams, you know, not aiming at Vitality, but think that the new showmaker is gonna just, you know, fall from the sky and destroy the whole scene after 5 matches. And if you look at Caps, right, which is the prime example of like absolute genius rookie that went to like World Finals two times in semifinals, once more. He has like he's the most skilled probably mid laner EU ever had. He wasn't as great on the first year. That's
Sure.
like, if people want to remember only the very best of Caps, they can. But the truth is, he had a steady start and he was improving kind of at the pace of an Edioya right now as at the jungle position. You can't.
He definitely entered a bunch of games as well. You know, he was like a coin flip player back then. Yeah,
and Humanoid the same. And Humanoid did the same. And so these great players, as great as they are, they are not prepared for everything that happened within the season. And at least the management needs to protect them in a way that they understand the decision of the management. And I don't think that, maybe from the inside, I don't know, you know, and maybe Ziganda knows exactly what he's supposed to do. And SLT is like, okay, I'm super happy to play in ERL this week and stuff. But it feels like from the audience and with the communication they're providing, that neither of the two is the priority. That's the problem. And eventually, you see that you feel like neither of the two is the priority. I know how you feel like Wicked, because I mean, you've been playing, and on top of that, you were playing top lane, and it's a very thankless job to play top lane and competitive. How do you feel? Like, how would you feel in this situation?
I mean, I think it depends, right? I think they just need to be signed and they need to be told what their job is. If it's Vitality, the job is probably you just need to survive. You know what? Be up there, play weak side, survive, and hope your teammates carry you. That's probably the job of a Vitality top laner, right? And if you know that job going into it, then that's fine. And you need to have the right champions for them to practice it. And they just need to pick the right player for that job. But it just seems like the communication is really weird. One thing I want to touch on is the Caps thing you said. Caps was indeed a rookie that came in at what is the talent, right? But even before that, he was actually age gap from going into the LEC. People wanted to pick him up when he was 15 and 16, but they couldn't due to his age. He actually played since, I think he was 14 or 15. He played in 2015 in Enemy. Then he played in some other teams. Then he joined the team I was in, Nerve. And then he played in Turkey as well. So he's been around for a long time before even going into the LEC. And people had wanted him for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I would even say that ties back into what Zabateen's saying, because if even Caps had all that experience, then came in and in his first year had problems, like, think of some of the people we're getting now. Like, we're bringing in players like Vethio, like this. You guys don't have experience. Like, they would even be, I would consider them like colloquially rookies, even in ERLs. Like, because by the way, Zabateen, I hate that thing where like rookie is literally a Riot thing. That means you played one split. Like, if you play, like, as far as I'm concerned, someone who came into LEC last year is a rookie. I'm talking about rookie in the normal term of the word, you know. Because there's another thing I have a problem with, is when you make these teams, so I'll use the Vitality example, one of my problems with bringing in a player like SLT is, first of all, there's the whole like role overlap, which is, if this guy is at all meant to be a carry, why the fuck have I put him on a team like this, where I've got like mid and jungle pretty much joined the team to play together, and then the fucking bot lane is like some pretty, I would say, pretty bold personalities who definitely think they can carry the game as well. Like, first of all, you haven't given the guy much room there. Like, you sort of got one role he could play, like Rick had said. And then the second thing I would say is this. They've done a terrible... Here's another thing I want GMs to really think about in these seasons. If you're going to bring in rookies, and by the way, you're bringing them in because you hope they will be the next Caps. There'll be some super talent, like a leader maybe could be, right? If you bring them in, they can't just be on teams on their own. Like, you got to have the right veterans around them. Like, there's the thing that Vitality, I think, completely messed up. Where are the veterans on this team? People either weren't in LEC. Like, dude, the veteran on Vitality right now is Crownshot. And Crownshot already came into LEC in fucking Season 9. Like, he isn't a true veteran in that sense. So, this is, if you want to bring in these young players, then you've got to have Vander. You've got to have these sorts of players who've been there and can actually, like, help them with this shit. And it can maybe even help them in the game. Like, I think people are kind of like, we use the term in English, like, sink or swim. That is exactly what they're doing with these players. They're just gambling. They're gambling like, you either are the next Caps, or if you're not, fuck it, I'll try the other guy in Academy. That's the angle I don't like, is if I feel like you're just doing it like, you're just hoping it works. So you don't even have a good reason for it, you know.
And if you look at some players, because I mean, Caps is not even the best example. I think one of the player that has shown like that time benefits some players more is Jankos. I don't think that Jankos, he was good, but he hasn't been as dominant as, I mean, this year is a little bit hard for him, but I feel like he has met his prime pretty late into his career. Even though he was at this semifinals and stuff at 2016, I feel like he has improved drastically joining G2 and working with these players. And you can take as well the example of Odo Amne, that I think is just getting better with every single year he's playing. And I don't think that you can just some players, yet like precocity is one aspect of like the quality, like the skills that you're gonna have on a player, but it's not because you don't have this level of precocity and you're just able to just be the best in like 6 months that you might not be the best in 2 years, right? It's like some players that have just a steadier development, and the problem is just by flipping them between two environments that have a very drastic skill and pressure difference, you're not sure you're taking the best. So I feel like if you're picking a rookie, you must make sure that you have the right environment for them to feel like, and tell them in advance the hurdles they're gonna face. Otherwise, they're just gonna hit a wall, feel like they're not good enough, and then within their head, they're gonna just build wall that they're not good enough to actually reach this level. And if you look at the past, a lot of players went back and forth. Look at Woolite right now is playing in the Misfits Premier. He's playing amazing. Woolite is like a grandpa of the grandpas of League of Legends.
Sure.
Like he's been playing since I'm casting pretty much. Weren't you playing with Woolite at some point, Wicked?
Yeah, I played with Woolite as well. He's a really fun guy to play with. I actually think Woolite and Crown should have a very similar playstyle.
And right now, from his performance on stage, I would not be surprised if he was starting tomorrow, like in a team such as Vitality or SK. I wouldn't be surprised.
I don't know if you can confirm this, but I basically heard that like he's the ultimate example of where like a Reddit meme and narrative is like it just can't be defeated at this point in time, because basically everyone says if they hear Wu like, oh, isn't he that guy from like 5 years ago who just entered every fucking team fight, you know, and did like mad flash, which by the way at the time was true, but that was like half a decade ago at this point in time. And I have actually heard from a lot of people who follow the ERLs that every time he goes to like the ERL level, he's actually one of the best AD carries in whatever league he plays in, basically, and that he may well have developed, but you know, people just can't get out of that mental prison that he is whoever he was half a decade ago.
I agree.
I think even during those times, right, it wasn't that Woolite was ever bad. Woolite just had the situation that a lot of AD carries actually have, even a lot of NA AD carries have had it, where you just tend to get caught a lot. Like, it's the same with Vital. He also tend to get caught a bunch of times, right? And that's the thing. When you play aggressive as an AD carry, you increase the chance of you getting caught. That's why you don't really see Reckless get caught that often, because often he plays passive. There's a Reddit thread recently, the Reckless on the subreddit, and he auto-attacked one time in like a 5-second team fight, right? Because you're like, oh, the team fight seems to be lost anyways. There's no real point to do anything. Or that's what I assume, right?
Yes.
And you just have the difference with somebody like Tabs, Woolite, Wild Turtle. They're going to go balls deep, and maybe they get caught because of it. And it will happen more often because they put themselves in a situation that's more risky. But they can also do more if they get the perfect fight for them.
Yeah, I just feel like this whole the problem, like what's very funny is when you compare LEC and LCS. I've put my attention much more to LEC and ERLs this year. It's kind of the opposite situation, because LCS has kind of a shortage of new faces coming from the ladder that might and sub, I would say, sub tier 1 leagues, because I think the level of academy is much lower in competition and intensity than the ERLs in Europe. So the pool of talent ready to actually be picked and tried is much drier in LCS, and it creates a lot of problems in terms of like picking the talent and keeping them, buyouts, and all these problems that you can have within the LCS. And on the other hand, you have kind of an abundant situation of rookies that you can pick. Like I can give you 3 or 4 names in ERLs of players that will, if they don't play in LEC next year, I think they're not playing at their right level. And then it creates this thing of, oh, we can always try someone else. We always have the choice, right? And it's like, I don't know, every team in LEC is a very, very, very hot person that knows that they can change partner anytime they want. And it's very hard because it's extremely like pressuring and makes the player very anxious. When you know that you SLT and you have Ziganda and you have Adam that's coming, and you might have a new guy coming in like the next 2 months, or you are a mid laner and you have Tukui that's not playing, you have Saken in Carmine Corp that's not playing, and you're like, oh, am I going to lose my job because I lost this team fight? It becomes extremely hard and pressuring to be able to play at the level. And because we stated that not every single player has the same development and progression, we are going to waste a lot of workforce in Europe. We're going to sacrifice a lot of talent doing that way of just Kleenex sweeping players.
I even think as well, by the way, like this is something to watch for in the coming years. If this whole, as you say, like the pressure cooker environment continues, where if I'm a rookie, I not only am trying to worry, like, can I play well right today? I'm also worried about the idea of like, will I be replaced next split, etc. I'll tell you something I predict will happen if orgs keep gambling constantly like this, which is people will start to, when the team goes badly, it won't just go badly like, you know, we lose the odd game. These teams will all collapse in on themselves, and And when you lose, one of the reasons why will be the players who aren't the ones doing badly will also start to just play selfishly and be like, look, if this team's going to do badly and people are going to get fired, I'm not going to be the one who looks bad in this team fight, or I'm not going to be the one who just dies like early on in this. Like, I'm going to play like a little bit selfish. You know, I won't like throw the game, but it's like I you know, like I always used to say this about Froggen. It's like, listen, I obviously think he's a very good player, but I understand why some people criticise him, which is they thought in certain games he wasn't doing enough. And I said, well, that's the part of the problem with also the business of the game, which is if I know my team is losing this game and I'm like a mid laner playing a control mage, I can be very smart about how I play this team fight, so I won't look like I'm the one who lost us the game and we'll lose the game anyway. I might look, oh, that was pretty good, you know, like certain roles are going to have a natural bias where they can just do that, it's true. Whereas, for example, if you're like a ganking jungler, yeah, good luck doing that, mate. Like, you're just going to look like an idiot half the game and it'll look like you're throwing the match because the fan won't know what you were trying to do. So, like, that's one of the reasons why I worry about this whole thing of, like, we'll replace you tomorrow. Because I think what the environment it sets up in the team is terrible as well. It almost makes everyone, like, just, it's dog eat dog, as it were, Zabatine. You're looking out for yourself, not the team. Whereas, like, in a team concept, certain roles have to sacrifice. You know, you want those guys to believe if they go in that everyone's backing them up and, you know, we support what you're doing, etc.
But if you look at the standings, right, you have Misfits. They didn't make a single change. And on the paper, if I give you these 5 names at the beginning of the year, nobody's going to tell me that after the first round robin of Summer Split, they're going to be tied first with Rogue. Nobody would say it. Then you have Rogue that made no change. Mad Lions made no change, and so you just have Fnatic that actually made, I think, decent changes. They have a very, very good and the environment and the atmosphere of the team is actually brilliant. But most of these teams is what I was saying. Like, if you're tied to make drastic and very frequent changes because you're not winning, you're not. Except if you have kind of a miracle thing like a Mickey X situation at Splice. Usually you don't end up like winning this whole split.
The gambles don't pay off. Yeah, of course.
And like I don't want to count like Schalke out. I think that Schalke, for instance, I mean, Schalke is a very specific situation, so let's not talk about it. But I don't think that I think it's gonna be very hard for SK Gaming or Astralis to, like, right now they have kind of a decent last week, but I think it's gonna be very hard for them because they're always building a lot from the ground up every time, and once they reach their peak, they're like, oh, we didn't make playoffs, so we need to change, and they just rebuild the team. Whereas, for instance, Misfits, they didn't make playoff, and they were like, okay, I think we could make playoff if we actually keep working together. So they started not there because obviously the holiday hits pretty hard on teams, but they started maybe a little bit lower, but they started back there, and now they're tied with like these super teams, and you are like, oh, Misfits is actually playing decent here because they already fixed their problem in the spring split. And that's about it. It's just about continuity in sports.
I mean, that's true, but also just look at G2 right now. G2 is not doing very well, but I still have full confidence in G2 as a team because I feel like their play is solid. They had some unlucky results, but their play is solid. They play well, and I trust in the team as well, right? And I think that's just an important aspect which you touched on. You have to trust in the team, and if you don't trust in the team, then the results don't really matter that much because even the better team can lose a game. It happens quite frequently. And that's also why when you mentioned Astralis, I was like, yeah, I agree. I don't think Astralis is going to do very well. They're tied for 5th right now, but I'm like, probably not a very good team. I don't like how they play. I don't really like the team or how they do things.
Yeah, on top of that, I mean, G2, it has problematic. It's just probably they are at the end of a cycle as well. They have the same skeleton of players since a long time. Staying the best for very, very long is the hardest thing that ever exists in sports, right? Being the best once is hard, but staying the best is unreal hard. So I understand why G2 is struggling at the moment, but for the other teams, I don't feel like Vitality is gonna switch Siganda and suddenly like beat Rogue, Fnatic, and all these teams that have like kind of a honeymoon phase or have this steady improvement throughout the year, because it's so much to learn. Like, switching a player is so much to learn for the 4 others and even the staff. Like, managing one different player. I mean, I made mistakes of switching players, and actually it fucked up my whole week of scrims. Not because, like, I think on the paper, the idea of the player full potential on this patch was good.
In the traditional sense, they don't have Bjergs anymore. There's no double lift. There's none of the classic players, right? Really, it's only TSM in name, and it's a bunch of new players playing for them. But the problem is, if you're an LCS player and you play against TSM, it says that on paper, and you know the fans are going to be hating on you if you win or lose the game. Like, the pressure, it almost does like create like a historical like track record that carries through to today. Like, it's different playing TSM. So similarly, I actually do think, believe it or not, even though in my opinion, G2, the team right now, is way worse than Rogue, if you're Rogue and you've lost to them a million times, and individually you still think they're good, that actually still can carry on in your mind, in my opinion. You can still think like, oh, fuck, it's still them. Because I think that's one of the reasons why in the last few years, everyone was always like, it'll always be G2 and Fnatic in the final. And I always used to be like, but why the Fnatic pick though? Like, Fnatic doesn't even have the best players, but that's part of the reason why I think the psychological burden does stick with some players. So let's do this G2 topic then. Right, Wicked. The problem with the team overall is this. People either are just focusing on one or two players they think are playing bad, like Wonder's an obvious example people are criticising a lot at the moment, or they're asking, is the coaching staff fucking up? What do you, from your perspective as an outsider, what do you think's wrong with G2, the squad?
I think G2 have some aggressive players that like to take risks, and the problem you have when you have an aggressive player that likes to take risk is if it backfires really hard and blows up in your face, right? So I think they have some unfortunate situations where it backfired. They lost the games because of it, because it's very hard when it snowballs and everything. And I don't actually think G2 is that bad of a team. I think we have very few games so far. We have 9 games. If we had 100 games, it would look completely different, even if they played at the exact same skill level as they're doing right now. And then also, I think they're going to be played even better because they're a good team, as I said earlier. They seem to work together as a team. They seem happy in the interviews and everything. So overall, I'm very, very big on G2. Now, personally, I did actually bet on Rogue, and the reason for that is because I just think Rogue is phenomenal right now in every single sense. So I did bet on Rogue here, but against everyone else, I actually think G2 would have a really, really good shot.
Okay. If I remember, I'll update who won on that one. We can talk some shit next week or whatever. We'll see. Right, Zabatine, what do you think of the G2 issue?
I think G2... wants to play on the edge, and I think that's the amount. The game have been changing a lot. This year is very different from the previous years. They don't have a traditional playstyle, and it's very hard to stay on the edge if you don't when you're already the best. And I think the level of motivation hasn't. I think that the loss in 2019 kind of stopped the momentum of the team, and since then I haven't seen them as dominant. And I feel like it's going to be very hard for them to kind of find the motivation of competing with people that probably are a little bit hungrier, but they still have players that will go to. I would be surprised if G2 doesn't go to Worlds, but I feel like it's going to be very hard for them to be as hungry as other teams during a regular season after everything they've been through and being as dominant, because it's not a blame on them. It's just natural trend of sports in general. After years on the top, you always see a small decline, and that's just the moment where you start seeing cracks in the egg, and that's not normal. Then they're gonna show us if they can bounce back, and I think they can. It's a matter of mentality, and that's where you see the greatest champion in sports is where they can actually fix the cracks into the egg and just go back at it like nothing happened. But it is very hard, especially in League of Legends.
I actually have a tangent we can go on here that's a little bit more abstract. It's about how, do you make teams and make changes? But basically, when you said earlier about G2, the end of a cycle, right? This is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because I know from the management and the coaching side, I've been very fascinated by the coaches who just win, they just keep winning. So obviously the European examples like Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, he just at the end of his career, he had none of the players from the beginning, he was still winning. So that just shows that you've sort of cracked the formula to winning, right? And if people don't know, he himself said in his books, he considered each group of players to have, I think he said something like 3 to 4 years was the window that a group of players had. And his idea was, after 3 to 4 years, you've got to change some of the pieces. It's not about whether they're good or not. It's you got to make a new project, sort of. Now, one of the reasons I bring this up is when we had Youngbuck on Summoning Insight this week, he said something similar, because he's obviously just done these 2 moves in Excel where he's brought in the rookie and the support and the jungle, where he said he also thinks that when you make changes to a lineup, sometimes you shouldn't make 1 change, you should make 2 changes, because the logic is that you're bringing in a whole new element. Now, the way I wanted to tie this in is looking at G2. Obviously, all they did is make 1 change, and funnily enough, the change they made at AD carry looked like the most obvious, at worst, side grade, if not upgrade of all time. On paper, it was right, what's the 1 AD carry you could bring in right now from Europe that in theory could be better than Perks at AD carry? It's Reckless. honest, like it seemed like a slam dunk, right? But the reason why I bring this up is because I've noticed even the G2 players themselves, when they talk this year about not being as good, they don't talk like they're a brand new team. Aberdeen was Reckless. They talk as though they're still the old G2, and like, you know, we're just going to bring Reckless in, we're going to integrate him, it's going to work. And I've even seen people like Jankos, they talk about the past years. I think this is actually really unhealthy, dude, because to me, this is why I think if maybe they'd done 2 changes, this is just an example, it might be different. Because when you make one player move, it's very easy to think, well, we're the same team, but with just this guy changed. But to me, this G2 has almost none of the qualities of the G2 from the last years. Like, I think they would be better off, no joke, if they thought of this as they were on a brand new team. And it was like, right, well, who are my teammates now, right? This guy, this guy, this guy. Because if you keep thinking, like, I'll give you a very quick tangent. There's actually a historical concept, like in the study of history, that supposedly when civilizations reach a point where things start breaking down, that what they tend to do is they look back in their history for when the last like glorious moment was. This is supposedly why, like, you know, the Enlightenment happened in Europe and stuff. They were reaching back to like Greek antiquity and the Roman period, and they're going for like beautiful, you know, art and architecture and philosophy. And what you're trying to say is like, when was the last time things were great? Right? Let's go back to that. Let's go and grab some of that and bring it to now. And the problem is, in a game like League of Legends that changed, you can't even really do that. Like, first of all, you don't have the same team you did now. You don't have Perks at AD carry. You don't have any of the things he brought. And more importantly, the game is just different now. So, like, to me, I wonder if G2 themselves have wasted a lot of time trying to, like, you know, recreate the past or change. Like, I think, for real, the best thing you could do to these players would be, like, Men in Black mind wipe the last 2 years and just say, start today. Like, look at your skill set. Look who your teammates are. Build a team that works tomorrow. What do you think on this, Sabatine? Have I gone too far?
I think there is a part of truth in what you said, because I feel like obviously if you change just one player, and I don't think that it's very easy for management and even more for the set of players to understand what made them good in the first sure. Like the former years. I don't think that there is a clear identification of what made them good, and I feel like Perks is one of these players that has a very specific playstyle. Like he's soaking so much pressure, always like kind of int racing on side, and the whole team collapses on him. That's something that I've only seen like Perks do all the time, and G2 was thriving in it because they have players that thrive in fighting and skirmishing, and Perks is always playing on the edge, understanding that he's gonna buy these 2-3 seconds and everybody's gonna collapse, and then you're gonna see like these many kills. Like Reckless doesn't play that way at all. Like and that's clearly like a change in paradigm on the way you need to play the game on a year where the game has been shifted, like changed a lot because of the items and all these new champions, and starting all of that for a group that seems to be the same with just a changed player is very, very hard. And I think that's just trying to again, you know, try to sort all these information to try to find what makes them good. But the thing is, because of if you want to go faster in that process, you need to work extremely hard. Like rookie player, they play 15 games of solo queue a day, you know. So they know exactly what's good on the game. They know exactly what they want to do. They know exactly how they want to fight. They have an edge on what's played in Korea. How does Chovy play this very specific matchup? How does Nuguri play this? I don't think that's right now, for instance, a player like Wunder. I don't know him personally, so I don't want to judge too much, but I don't think that the drive is at that level. So they're going to be a kind of a slow momentum on figuring out how does G2 needs to play with Reckless, and they haven't found out yet, and they're just trying individually but not collectively. And I think because they're good enough at the game, they should arrive to Worlds, but maybe it's unfortunate, but I feel like this is a team that would need more than a year to actually figure themselves, even though they are veterans, and probably twice as much work, whether it comes to, you know, investigating what made them good in the past and what should make them good right now, and work individually as players to say, the team is not working well. I'm going to find what I can do on myself to improve the situation for 5 players, plus the coach, plus the staff, plus the top management. And this is where you see teams actually, you know, come back in years. But it's very hard in League of Legends because it's an ever-moving game. So once you pinpoint something and you're like, okay, we need to tackle that, the game has changed.
Yes. By the way, Wicked, wasn't it implied that, like, in the upcoming patches, they're sort of, like, making it so you can side lane again properly now, right?
So here's the thing with Riot. When they're talking about actually doing something for top lane, they don't know what they're doing. They don't know how to handle it. And they did imply that with the new items and so on. But I think it's been a massive failure of all, which everyone expected from the get-go. So the problem is Riot doesn't actually know how to solve the issue that they have without making the game unfair for one role or unfun.
Right,
So I don't think it's gonna happen.
because the thing is, I'd heard people saying that, like, you know, the meta's going to switch that way. If it's true, by the way, that could help G2 instantly. Like, if you look at the team they have, listen, if Captain Wonder could actually, like, side lane half the games on like, a decent pick, you could already win a fucking few games off that. Like, Caps was pretty good at it in the past. So, then again, though, I agree, like, you can never know what Riot wants to do. Actually, I had a similar topic on that one, actually. Maybe we'll do it now then, Wicked. So, I saw that one of the things that you are always super vocal about is the concept of dodging. I know LS has his own take on this, where, for example, LS thinks like if it's just about pure LP, you actually should dodge in certain scenarios when you know that like the guy's a troll or like they're doing the wrong pick or like it's a one trick and they were not picking it. Like he thinks for cynical reasons you should do it. But basically, if we're assuming the premise, Wicked, goes like this, ideally you don't want people to dodge most of the time. You want it to be like a last case resort, you know, or like very rarely used. Right? I saw you were making some tweets about it. Like, how have they actually started to tweak the dodge system? Like, is it actually good with the direction they're going? And what would you like to see happen? Like, for example, do you think dodging's fine?
So I think dodging as a player is fine because it's your own choice, right? You should dodge as much as you want, but I think the overall system you shouldn't be able to dodge, right? So Riot needs to fix the overall system, but it's for the players to abuse it however they can. Regarding the dodging thing and the changing, I don't think it matters that much, aside from it hurting low elo players, which I don't even think dodging is a big issue in low elo. I think it's only high elo. The problem is they're going to increase dodging for high elo if you dodge 3 times in 36 hours. And then it goes down one tier every 12 hours, right?
Right.
The problem is almost every single high elo player have 2 to 5 accounts. So if you cycle through 5 accounts, then you have almost infinite dodge times, right? So it doesn't really make much sense with the way they're going through it if you're thinking that every player have multiple accounts. And I'm pretty sure the majority of players, like probably the average is 2.5 to 3 accounts in high elo.
Do you have any thoughts on this topic, Zabatine?
I think dodging is unfortunately very healthy because if you want to train, right? If solo queue is not like just something to stream, you want a replicability of quality games. Like it's very important. That's why Korean players are more consistent at the game because they have more often a high quality game to play. Sure. So they get better habits. Because performance is all about creating. It's not getting rid of your bad habits. It's overriding your bad habits with good habits. But to create good habits, you need to be able to replicate a proper situation many times. And if you're playing against a Nunu mid that doesn't have his champion and try to play Teemo with Ghost and Clans, it doesn't make any sense. Like you're just gonna waste your time. Of course, you're gonna get the LPs, but if your goal is to replicate something that you can do on stage because you're a professional player, dodging is very healthy because you'd rather have the matchup you want to work on and being able to replicate what you saw Chovy doing, for instance, or I don't know, Nuguri, than just play a random solo queue mindlessly with music in your ears and just win your LPs. If you're content creators, that's a different topic, right? But the problem is everybody's playing on the same ladder because there is a lack of density of high-level games in EU because EU has the same problems as NA on a lower scale. But if you're playing in Chinese Super Server or like Korea, you never complain about it because, I mean, you face an OTP and he destroys you because he's just better at the game. But that's for me, my biggest problem is dodging is the only healthy way for players to choose the games they can play that are quality games. Otherwise, they're just wasting their time. And then the whole region is going to have worse quality games and players are going to be bad.
So I think there's 2 ways to look at it here, right? I agree with everything you said regarding that. But the thing is, you're looking at it as a practice environment where I'm looking at it as a fair ladder, right? To make a fair ladder, dodging shouldn't be possible because it makes the ladder unfair. And it makes the ratings less accurate. But if you're looking at it as a practice in my mind, yes, dodging is beneficial for the players. And it's also said earlier, each player should dodge as much as they can if it benefits them, right? Because every player should be selfish and only look out for themselves. They don't have to look out for the overall system. So it's 2 different things, I think, we're talking about.
I think that what you say is true, but since there is no reward on being first or second or third, like if there was a prize pool at the end of the season on like being, but since we all know that ladder is just a way of getting scouted and you have a whole industry on top of this ladder that formerly was kind of the peak of League of Legends, it should just be seen as a treadmill for as many players. Like either you would just run on the treadmill for entertainment, either you just run on the treadmill for performance. But at the end of the day, it's just a treadmill, and when you want to stop it, you just stop it and you do something else. For me, ladder is just a way of playing League of Legends mindlessly or with a purpose. But so I think what you say is true, but there is no reward. So making a fair ladder on the highest scale doesn't really matter.
I will say, if I was like a pro player and I was playing a solo queue game after scrims, like if someone locks in something that will never be used in pro play, like fucking brand support, I might just dodge instantly. Like, yeah, I get the premise. Like, if it's for practice, like, that's just a waste of my time in that case, isn't it? So that's actually the area, by the way, that if you notice, most problems that pros talk about or that get on Reddit, basically the real issue is this, it's where you try to get two totally different worlds to overlap and they can't overlap. So the overlap is obviously pure casual players playing for fun who just want it to be like a good, fun environment where people can do what they want, but at the same time, there's sort of some rules. And then pros who want to have the highest level of practice. Like, I always thought that's why in the early days when Riot was very resistant to stuff like practice tool or the idea of in-houses, it's like it was a bit short-sighted because you can't tell pro players for your practice you have to practice in a super inefficient manner where people can flame you and bait you and do stupid picks and run it down, but at the same time if you ever type any mean words in we'll just ban you competitively and you lose games and fight. Like, that's to me like a bit, that's like some fucking cruel and unusual punishment, you know, like it's one or the other. Like if you admit the environment's a bit shitty, then give me a bit of leeway as a pro player, you know, like obviously it's going to be frustrating, isn't it? Because there's no real way to fix it. Like, if you want it to be ideal for pros, it's not going to be as good for casual players. It's obvious at this point in history. Like, that's kind of been the whole story of esports, isn't it? Like, the way esports works right now is weird because on the one hand, you can't have the competitive business side unless loads of casuals play the game, which means you have to initially make the game for casuals. But at the same time, if you make the game way too casual, then the esports side just won't be as good. It'll be a bit diluted, you know. So it's why at the moment, if you look, no game's got it perfect. Like, I'll give you an example. People might love that Dota 2 has that, you know, it's so fucking sick for pro, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, and it's got a way lower casual base as a result. Like, it's not as big as League of Legends, is it? What were you going to say, Zabatine?
I think Rocket League does it very well. I think that Rocket League has the replicability because you have these training packs that allow you to do exactly what you want to work on. You can.
I've never seen this. Explain it to me. What do you do on this? I've never actually seen it aside from like the odd game on stream. What did they change in it?
So in Rocket League, for instance, if you want, I don't know, you want to hit the ball from the ceiling and you want to learn that, you can just download a pack that's gonna like throw the ball as many times as you want, like a machine, and you're gonna be able to replicate it. So once you master these movements in training mode, you can actually go on the ladder, and you have ranked and unranked, like any game, and you're gonna just be able to play it in games. And you have this whole esport, like the esport seems pretty much the same as League of Legends on top of it. The good point of this game is you have fun from bronze to like Super Sonic Legend, which is the equivalent of Challenger, and you can have fun with pretty much any friend, but you don't have dodging. And if you have a bad experience, it takes like a minute and a half to find a game. So I think that Rocket League does it very well. I just feel like League is a very popular and flowed game in many aspects. That's what I think Wicked was saying. It's not only about like the game or the position or the waves. It's a game that got designed to be a copy pasta of Dota, like an improved Dota 10 years ago, and became like a society mainstream sports to some extent, and has so many flaws that I don't think that there is a proper game design team that will actually fix all these problems that just go with the fact that a game lasts 30 or 40 minutes, and if you dodged it, you have to wait. Otherwise, like 9 players are losing their lobbies and stuff. So they just try to find band-aids, and it just becomes like the solution becomes a problem itself as well. So I don't think there is a proper way to fix that, but that's just League being a flawed game. I don't see any other way.
Okay. Right, since you referenced him earlier, let's talk a little bit about Misfits, actually, Zabatine. So you referenced earlier, obviously, like, Vethio's a player coming out of the French scene. In fact, he basically was, like, one of the studs last year. Like, you could sort of see this guy had skills. But with that said, he's also very, very young. Like, I don't think people realise he hadn't even played in the RLs very long, this player. And so, to me, like, that discussion we were having earlier, it's the other way around. I'm impressed with how well he's playing. Like, even though people were like, the first split wasn't so good, again, it's like, what do you expect, mate? Like, you're not just going to walk into a room with Caps and Humanoid and Larson and just go, I'm just going to smack all you guys around in my first ever game in this fucking room. Like, I think people have very unrealistic expectations. But now that the split's rolling, and they gave that entire team, as you said, a whole split to work it out, even though they weren't like, they had a lot of games that looked very unimpressive. Now everything's coming together. What do you actually think of this player? Like, is this a player, Zabatine, that we should actually expect, like, 2 years from now, they'll be like still in LEC, all LCS, all LEC level player? Like, what's the trajectory for Vethio, do you think?
I think the video is a very good example of the new generation of European players that have seen their, I would say, older brother touch the cup, but not really like grab it. They've been so close yet so far. And I think that any player from this generation, so I'm going to count VTO, Adam and stuff, that they are not motivated by anything besides winning worlds. I feel like for all these players, if you talk to them, it can be Nuclear from Schalke. I think all these players have the drive to try to compete against China and Korea and try to show that like Europe can actually go even beyond what G2 did. And I met him. So I met him in November because I was coaching for a month after Immortals. I spent a month coaching remotely LDLC. They needed someone to help them, so I met VTO there. And then when he got hired by Misfits, I pinged him and was like, "Do you want to work with someone that's on a personal level that has the experience?" So I'm following him like on a almost daily basis. I'm like helping me as well, like putting some type of theory into his game, being able to replicate the matchups, the things, because a lot of players play by, instinct, and he has an absolute wonderful instinct. But I told him, like, if you can't replicate some things and you don't have the theory, you're just going to hit a wall, because in LEC, all these players know exactly what they have to do in a game, because no, we're not in 2013. Like, the game has been theorized. Like, there are rules that you need to play by and stuff. So I've been working on the theoretical aspect, but as well, like, telling him in advance what makes a good player, which is, if you do something in scrims or if you do something in solo queue that works, it works every single time. And most of the rookie fail at recognizing that they need to play in a way that they make them good. And I think that this year has shown like an improvement in confidence from VTO in terms of, okay, I'm going to lane versus Cabs, but I see a play, I'm going to try to kill him. Or I see this very, like, he went for like double quadra kill in the first game with a Kali. And if you talk to him before the game, it's like, how do you feel? It's like, oh, I feel very confident in the champ. I'm like, okay, so you go for the play you see. You don't care if it's like, if you just run into a wall and you die and you just flash into a wall, that's part of the process. You need to try, otherwise you're never going to reach the level that Caps and Humanoid have, which sometimes they look like big inters, but they always try. And if you don't have this mental, you can have a great career, but you're never going to reach the level that you're setting the bar, like he's setting the bar at winning worlds. So he has to try to go for every single edge he can. And I think that he has the mentality. Like, for instance, at the end of the spring split, he wanted to work, so we made a whole planning together, and he has been respecting it. Like, every single pixel of his program was respected. Like, okay, he was playing as many games as he was saying. He was waking up every day at the hour he was mentioning. So from working that much, he's creating an edge. And if you see him at the moment, you feel like, oh yeah, he's very promising, and you see that his performance is getting more and more consistent. And I think that work outdone talent at some point, and he has the work ethics and he has a lot of talent. So I'm expecting him to be among the best mid laners in the next years. Is he gonna be the one that's gonna leave the World Cup? I wish him the best, right? I cannot say it would be very arrogant to say so, but at least I feel like this generation wants to work like professionals to reach this goal and beat China and Korea, and I think this generation can do it.
I think one really important thing you mentioned was that he should look for every opportunity in the edge. One thing I think in League of Legends is it's very easy to look like a good player by just playing somewhat safe, don't take any risk, just chill and do what you need to do. But the problem is, as you mentioned as well, you will never become the best. You will always be secondary. You'll always be one step under. You'll always be getting somewhat carried by a team or just doing your job. If you want to be the best, you have to do exactly as you said, where you have to take those opportunities. And yes, the best players will look like inters. Caps looks like an inter sometimes too. And that's just the playstyle you need to be the best player in League of Legends, I think.
You need to. I think that's the really big edge that nobody will see. And I wasn't able to see that, for instance, when I was coaching, because I took like pretty much 4 months just studying the game to be able to scout these differences among the greatest players. They see things that other don't, and Caps see small edges that other don't. Perks will see this, and VTO sees some plays that, and you see him do them, and you're like, okay, no, he needs to back off his 200 HP, and he goes for it, and he gets the edge, and he wins the game, and you're like, okay, that was a fantastic play. So because he sees it, not using this skill of being able to see these small plays would be a huge waste, and he would just become an average player. Because you have players that are probably more consistent or more aggressive or more vocal. But if his strength is being able to see these micro gaps in the enemy defense, he needs to go for them, even if he's gonna look like an inter like once in a while. Otherwise, he's gonna have a decent career, but never gonna like match his goal, which is being the best.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Also, one thing I want to mention is Razak. I don't know how to say his name. Razor K.
Razak, yeah.
Yeah, he did the bottom jungle against G2, went in towards the top side, ran over to the wall just between mid, the wall next to mid lane. He jumped over the wall and instantly went in on Caps and did a really sneaky gank. I didn't expect that happening. I was watching the game, right? I was like, well, what is he doing? Why is he going there? I had no idea what was going to happen. He kills Caps and creates a massive lead. And I think that ties into the entire thing we're saying, with the new players actually looking for all those opportunities, and they're playing in a much more aggressive way, which I really, really like seeing.
Yeah, but I think that's for instance, that's one thing that LCS and NA need to teach is just risk losing, risk dying, risk looking like a moron. And the fans need as well to understand that it is part of a process.
Yes.
Because you're never going to have the outplays, the massive outplays that you're expecting if players never dare to do it. And I think that's the problem with Korea. I think players are much better in solo queue in Korea than they are on stage, because they're handshaking a lot of situation instead of trying to go for like the solo kills and stuff. And I know they are able to, because if you look at their solo queue, they're just monsters. Sure. But because the environment doesn't really foster taking risk, and I think that's probably the edge we have in EU and China, is taking risk is a natural part of the competitive environment, and this puts us on the map. So I think that every new player should know that that's how you're gonna get better at the game, is just play it like if it's a solo queue. And Yuya does the same, and I think that does wonders for the scene and for the whole region.
Yeah. I definitely agree, by the way, in terms of like the implication for your career if you sort of like beat out of the player, like, oh, don't ever take a risk like this, don't ever, like the famous example people might know, because it's a classic one from LCS, was way back in the day when the first time they had Wild Turtle as the AD carry of TSM. Famously, they literally did this on like, I don't know if it's called TSM Legends, but whatever the reality TV show was called back then. They literally had an episode where they just explained that they were telling him, like, don't ever flash forwards in the game, which is like, I remember saying back then, that's an absurd thing to say to a fucking pro player on like the best team in the region. Like, it's one thing if you just say, you know, in this scenario, you know, think about it or whatever, but like, again, like at that point in time, the player shouldn't be playing for your team if you're going to tell them something as extreme as that, especially because like the point here is like, maybe sometimes you will need to do that. Maybe that will be the limit test player that would actually win you the whole game. Because the thing you're saying, Zyrathenia, I definitely agree with it. In my opinion, it is the difference between LEC and LCS. If you think of all the teams, they were basically all the double F teams because they were always the number one seed, and then they'd go to Worlds, and famously they never got out of groups, right? One of the factors I used to hate about watching those teams was by the time they got to that second week where you've already taken a few beatings from the Asian teams, they looked like they already thought the game was lost before they even played the game, and they would even just play mad scared, just, you know, super conservative. If you get behind, like a Korean team in LCK, you know the whack thing about LCK is if the 7th best team plays the first team and gets slightly behind, they almost like gentlemen's agree to play the game correctly and just lose the game 20 minutes later. Like, they don't go for like, you know, some crazy move that my example would be like PCS region. Look at like the teams like GAM Esports, they'll just do some crazy shit to try and win the game, you know. Might have a very low chance, but it might not be your only chance. Because I would definitely agree with that. Like, the problem is, if you think, I'll give you the contrast. So, like, I gave the Double Lift example where his teams would always play conservative. I know a lot of American fans were really upset with this Cloud9 team that went to MSI. And I get it, right? Because in the end of the day, they didn't make the playoffs they were supposed to. But the upside is this. They did win a game off Damwon and RNG. And part of it's because they were willing to go for it. Now, that means if you look like shit, you look like shit. But if you don't go for certain limit test players, you can never beat the best teams in the world, in my opinion. I don't think it's possible. Like, you're not going to play, like, a boring standard game. Like, they'd have to basically give you, like, 10 advantages in a row to win that game.
And you need to play what makes you good at the game. For some players, it's just very vocal, and they are very smart about the game. Like, I don't know, I've been working with Medios. I think Medios is super crazy smart about the game. Sure. And if you let him express himself in a game, and people are eager to follow what he says and the way he thinks about the game, like, he thinks about the game like chess, you know. And I think that's, like, it's very unique. That's not a talent that you're going to see. Players are just going to say, oh, yeah, like, I don't know, he didn't do a right play on Lee Sin, but it doesn't really matter which champion he's playing on. Like, he's here to control the game and, like, tell what he thinks is the next correct play in the vocal. And I think that's like, you need to use the strength of your players. And the only thing that happens with, for instance, players like Vitio, you need to play like a madman, but you need to work, because you cannot afford like playing 2 or 3 solo queue a day and say I did my best. If you want to play and you want to create an edge from your like small advantage from matchups and situations, you need to play your 10 games a day. You need to make sure you're at peak knowledge and understanding of the game. Otherwise, you're just an average player, because you can play, I don't know, 2 solo queues a day if your key strength is shot calling and controlling the pace of the game. But if you want to be this kind of heavy carry playing on the edge, I mean, you need to do your reps. And what's going to be the challenge of Vitio is not this year, it's not next year. It's in 1 or 2 years, with the success and the deceptions that he's gonna face within his career, to be able to keep the grind and keep the edge he has mechanically today, because he's young and he's thriving to play League of Legends every single day. The day we'll lose that, he will start his decline, or he will have to find a way to change what makes him good, or find a way to get as smart with less games. But for the time being, that's how you get that level at this age.
Sure. I've actually got one very quick tip, actually, for any pros who are watching, who were thinking about that conversation that you said before about how it'll be easy for people from the outside to think you're inting when you go for these moves. Here's a real tip for these guys, which is, for real, put in time and effort, making a relationship with your coach where you can just explain what you were thinking in that move. Because if you can do that successfully, you'll get so much leeway. Like, I'll give you 2 examples. Wicked knows one of them. Right, Froggen and Forgiven, I've often said this on talk shows. One of the reasons why I've defended them on so many areas other people wouldn't is because these guys, no joke, are fucking amazing at explaining why they do things in the game. You don't have to agree, but these guys can argue with you for like half an hour about why they did this move in a team fight, and you might have a million good reasons, but the point is, because they're good at explaining their thinking, if you follow the initial premises they set up, it will make sense. Like, if they're saying, like, I'll give you an example. If back in the day, like, Forgiven's team lost a game and I was like, didn't you play like a bit of a pussy in this team fight though? Sometimes he would literally just like break it down and be like, no, look at this frame here. Like, if I actually had gone in for this auto attack, you don't notice it, but like the fucking jungler's flanking me here, and then this other guy saving his CC for me. Like he would explain it in a way that you were like, actually, yeah, you know more factors than I do about the play. Like, maybe there is a logic. So like, another thing is, you can't just do it like, oh, sorry, coach, I just didn't. Like, people almost meme too much. Like, just explain for real what you were going for. Because if the vision makes sense, even if the execution was flawed, like Zabatine said, maybe then the coach said, oh, that's fine then. Like, yeah, if you saw there was a kill there, go for it. Like, if you think you can pull it off, yeah, it makes sense. Because that's why I agree with the hard work aspect, mate. Because it's a bit like players who want to like first time a champion. If you really want to first time a champion, but you did just play like 50 games of it in solo queue, the coach is going to be way more open to that than if you're like, I want to first time it, but I barely played it, and just believe me that it works. Like, that's a very different proposition right there.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, that's something I've seen, and I think that's kind of never fails. It's very rare that you're gonna have a great team with players not playing the game. Like, you're gonna have players that can maintain a very high level by playing less, but the highest, every team that wins Worlds every year is a bunch of players that play the game a million times a year. Like, it's not even real how much they play. Whether it was Damwon, FPX, whether it was in the past Invictus Gaming, these players play all the time. They just play all the time because League is a changing game. So you can't adapt with fundamentals. Like, past Grandmaster or Challenger, everybody has the fundamentals. So the difference is going to be how well you apply the fundamentals, knowing exactly how much HP you're going to get at the end of this trade, or what this rune does in this very specific matchup. So you need to apply a lot, and I feel like that's one thing that I think, for instance, C9 does a lot. They always have players that play the game a lot. Like, if you scout C9, you're going to see like the amount of solo queue play by their players is always very high. If you look at, for instance, like players like powerhouse, I've worked with him. He plays so much the game, and there is no surprise. There is no surprise on that. You need to work hard. You need to do your reps, and few exceptions will have perfect control of a game just by shot calling. But you don't need like 5 players like this in a team.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I think the majority of the players on the team definitely need to play a lot. I think there can be the shot caller. There can be players that don't need to play as much, that just watch a lot of replays. But even then, I'm saying they don't play much, right? I'm talking about 8 hours a day, roughly. That's a low amount of games a day, right? Where a high amount of games would be 10 plus or around 10. So I think it really depends on the player.
Yeah. It depends on your position as well. But like, you can blame on Reckless for a lot of things, but work ethics, for instance, I think he's a great player. I think Perks has a very good work ethics. Caps playing a lot of solo queue. I see him a lot playing solo queue. VTO plays a lot. Adam plays a lot. Like, these new players that play, they just play. Like, if you ask him, how are you good at the game? It's just, I'm just playing, man. I'm just playing. And it's like, you look at the history, and every day it's just a blank new OPGG with 10, 12, 15 new games. And that's how they became so good. So I feel like the most important is that they keep working, but at the same time, they understand that this work is meaningless if they don't transition it on stage. And that's where I think the old generation needs to teach that, and for them not to make the same jump, but as much when they come back from MSI. I mean, they are the 100 Thieves of Europe. They are the growing team. Previous GG, right, bought by 100 Thieves. They just have a very good set of players. They were kind of all the best rookies, upcoming rookies at the moment when they got hired. I think that their staff is really good. I mean, it was the former staff of Splice, because Splice was Peter Dunn, Duke, and Mac. Duke went to Vitality. There was Mac that stayed in Mad Lions, and I mean Peter went eventually to NA. But I know, like, from the fact that he's a very, very clever person and he knows a lot about the game. And I think this is just a set of very smart players about the game, and it really shows. And once again, they just got an edge of, I think, working so hard with having great fundamentals and great ethics that they just managed to outperform everybody in Europe. And I'm very happy, because I feel like on top of having the G2 Fnatic rivalry, now we have the Rogue versus Mad Lions, and it's always like banger games.
Yes.
And I feel like it's very, very important for the region that G2 is losing to Mad, and we have this new fresh air coming and new storylines. Okay. So I'm overall extremely happy that the product that was kind of aging, which was Splice, changed into the bunch of rookies that are actually taking the throne and the king. And I think it's only beneficial for the scene and for the region. And on the aspect of the game, they're just playing very, very well at the game. Like, there is no comment. Like, they're very, very good players.
What do you think, Wicker? Are they the best team?
I'm coming from a different perspective. So I did the same bet as you, and I have reasons for it. So I think Mad Lions last week didn't play that well. They won one game and then they lost a game. They played against Misfits and Rogue, which are two really good teams. I think the Misfits and Mad Lions games, both of the teams played pretty sloppy. And then the Rogue game, Rogue actually gets 3 kills behind very early on in the game. Mad Lions should snowball very hard from that, especially because it's been bot lane. But they didn't really manage to do that, and Rogue made a massive comeback. I think Mad Lions have been looking weak recently. And I think XL have been looking absolutely phenomenal. So I would consider XL a top team, probably like top 4, top 5, and Mad Lions the same. But I think right now, with how they've been playing last week and recently, I think XL have a small edge, and the odds are just amazing for the team. So I had to make that one.
Let's flip it and talk about XL then. So obviously, like we discussed it a little bit on the Amazing episode, they did this move where they brought in these 2 players, which, as far as I can tell, they weren't really like super secret. Like, people knew these players were good. Apparently, XL themselves even thought, they claim, about using like the Adrien guy, for example, like already at Adrien at the beginning of the split, but like they chose not to for some reason. I can't remember what the reason they gave was. It sounded a bit bunkum, but whatever. They claim this was the case. Right, Zabatine, are you actually going to be like the rest of us? Are you going to drink the Kool-Aid that this team's really good now? Will they just fall back off to being okay? What do you think?
I think that I compare Excel to Astralis, and I think that's for teams that have been making changes. I think Astralis have the same rank, but they look much worse, while Excel actually plays well. Like, they play better than their ranking, and Astralis plays worse. And I think that's the dynamic is definitely upward for Excel. I know that, I mean, there have been a lot of backstories during the year, and I mean, everybody can make mistake. I'm not here to like shit talk any organization. I've made my fair share of dumb thing in the past. I'm very happy because I've seen, like, for instance, the interview of Advien, and he seems to be a genuinely super nice guy, and I feel like the whole environment works super, super fine. So if they're happy and they can actually challenge and show that sometimes bringing rookies and giving them the sad part of it is, as you say, like, if they are that good and the dynamic is so good, I wish they weren't like thrown in the middle of a split, but they were given a fair chance from January. Because if you take these 5 people, I mean, maybe nobody knew, right? But if you take these 5 players with this environment and they're very happy to play together, you just wish they could play from January, and maybe right now they would be a top team.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. Like, one thing we even talked about in one of the last shows was Patrick is really, really good. We talked about Kris being amazing in top lane. He just hadn't really showed himself. And then we talked about this team being all-around nuke dog, right? Back then, they're losing all the time. And the thing is, they brought in the exact pieces they needed. They brought in a new support who fits well, that he's support player. And then they brought in a carry playmaking jungler that sets up nuke dog all the time. They literally picked the exact players that they needed for the team, got them in, and that's why I think they have such a big edge now compared to before. But again, as I said earlier, their odds are just amazing as well. It was 3.8 then I bet on them, so I mean, that's really good odds.
Yeah, it make me feel like, you know, the example you were taking, Thorin, about the guy that was picking the random ass player that was fitting their playstyle.
Yes.
I feel like Excel is not great at everything, but I think that they at least know they're good at one thing.
Yes.
So as long as the game doesn't change the way that the thing they're good at is gone, I think they can clinch games. In a BO5 setup, it might be much harder for them because usually these teams are a little bit two-dimensional and they get like out-diversed by better teams. But it feels very good to know that these teams are gonna be tough opponents, even for teams like G2 or Mad Lions or any other top teams in the region.
Yeah. I mean, one reason why I actually have some confidence they can be good is, like, in my opinion, the main problem XL the Augurs had is they just aren't signing very many good players. Like, I always wonder when I look at the people they're picking up, like, do they actually have money in XL? Like, they always look like they're the ones where they're picking players that no one else was trying to get, typically. So I always wonder in that sense, like, were you given the tools to work with? But if you get them, I actually do think, and I'll just say, go and look at the results. There's a reason why this team is always right on the borderline of playoffs, no matter who is in the lineup. Go and look at the last 3 splits worth of players they had. They have players who aren't even in LEC anymore, and they were like 1 game from playoffs. So one thing I've always credited Youngbuck with is I think he is a really good coach at sort of being a bit cynical, and when a team is flawed, just figuring out, like you say, Zabati, like, what can this team actually do? Like, with these players, basically, here's the analogy. Yeah, Youngbuck doesn't have all the best Lego pieces, but he can make, like, fucking something out of it. Like, I've only got enough pieces to make a tractor. Like, there we go. Difference is, some of these other teams have got no fucking good pieces. They're trying to make, like, a fucking battle cruiser. Like, it's never going to work for them. So, I think, basically, he's like a pragmatic coach, in my opinion. So, I don't know. I put it this way. I'm sort of riding the hype initially. I don't know what they'll do in the playoffs, but I do think this could be the game changer, and they look like they could be a playoff team now, at least.
Isn't it like because I'm just looking at the standings, so who's out of playoff? Because if Misfits, Rogue, Fnatic, Mad Lions, and G2 are coming, so Schalke, Vitality, SK, and Astralis not making it. This is what you say.
My problem is this, right? If I look at the teams that are in there at the moment, right, I can't really hate on Fnatic anymore. They've just been too good. I've got to kind of give them credit. Astralis, I don't think makes it. I'm amazed they've won as many games as they have. Fair play to them. I do think Magic Felix is good. I think XL can make it. I personally think Schalke might be the team that drops off. Nuclear actually looks decent, but the problem is the Kyrie issue will have to be addressed at some point in time. Like, he's having some bad games, mate. He can throw. SK gaming is pretty bad. I don't know, because I guess if I can only pick 6, let me see. The problem is this. I actually do feel like Misfits is going to cool off, but they've won a lot of fucking games already. Like, it's pretty hard to not make the playoffs if you've won 7-2. So let me think. If I'm picking 6 teams, so if I take I'll go Rogue, Mad Lions, Fnatic, G2, so there's 4 teams already. If I say XL makes it, I've only got 1 spot left. Yeah, the problem, I guess, is I'm basically picking between, like, Misfits and Vitality. I can't really hate on Misfits. I'll have to just say for now, like, Vitality doesn't make it, then, I guess. Because one of Vitality or XL is probably not making it, if I'm being realistic.
But
what do you actually... Yeah, go on.
I think it's one important thing to notice, but I don't think we necessarily have to pick 6 teams for playoffs. Personally, I would be picking 7 teams that could make it, and then we don't know exactly what's going to happen, right? I think Schalke, SK, and Astralis, I don't think those 3 are making it, but the last 7 teams can all make it. And it could happen that G2 doesn't even make it, right? G2 is one of the bottom ones.
Maybe.
Right now. Maybe they don't make it. Maybe it's Vitality. It could be anyone. Whoever underperforms with the rest of the teams might be the ones on the chopping block.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like G2 is not looking like the way they were looking against Misfits last week was great. Like, they were back at it. And the fact they lost this game is such a like momentum stopper. So I can't really know like how tilted they are and if they worked well this week. For sure, I mean, Vitality with the changes, you really never know. And if Ziganda doesn't work, bring back SLT is going to be such a mess for them. I don't know like how the team dynamic is going to adapt. Schalke, unfortunately, I mean, they're on the sunset of their existence in the LEC. I don't know how it affects the players and stuff. They have great players for sure, but I feel like most of their players must be thinking about their off-season more than going to Worlds with Schalke. And SK, I mean, SK is a very unfortunate set of events. We haven't been mentioning them that much, but I mean, I feel like for me, the teams that are not going to make it are Astralis, Vitality, Schalke, and SK. And I wish SK is going to be able to change, because I don't think they're like a bad org, but I feel like they just have a very bad year this year. Like it's just not working with too many changes.
Well, the weird thing about their team, maybe we'll just talk about that, we'll make it the last topic. The weird thing about the SK one is, like, first of all, just as a disclaimer, I did used to work for SK Gaming, but to be fair, I did leave in 2012, so that was a long time ago now. I'll just say that for the sake in case people think I'm being biased or something. But I would agree. Right, here's the issue. If we're talking about them as an org in League of Legends, I can tell you a problem they've always had is they just don't want to spend money. Like, I know that from the top, from talking to some of the guys back in the day. They're a team that, like, they want to kind of min-max, basically. They want to pay, like, just enough to get, like, a decent player, and then they just hope the coaching staff do the rest, basically. Now, if in the context that they're not going to spend big, I actually think they've done pretty well the last few years. Like, they're another org that's never getting the biggest names, but they're always, like, they've been playoffs a bunch of times, or they're just outside playoffs. Like, generally, with the pieces they've had, they've done a good job. My issue is just that I don't feel like they're an org that's ever going to be a top team, because they look like, even if they get a good player, they don't go break the bank to keep them. The best players leave the team, and then they just start over again with the rookies. So I put it this way, I'm not one of the people who wants them like kicked out of LEC instantly, because they've just been too good performance-wise. I think it would be unfair. But I do think like they are lacking a little something. Like, I never feel like any SK gaming live is really going for the fucking title. And if it is, like I say, if they have a sick player like Southmade, or even when Crownshot was good, you know they're going to be leaving eventually. All the good players basically just leave the team. Like, they go to better squads.
Yeah, and it's just overall very hard to retain your players if you don't raise them. Like, even top sports club, you know, they have to raise their players. Like, yes. Messi wasn't paid as much when he started at Barcelona, and then they just have to, you know, match the price. I feel like the problem, I would say, just in SK is they're making too many gambles at once. Like, Tweets brought back from NA was a very clever move. I think Blue is a very good mid laner. I think Jesu is it's very hard for me to rate ADCs in general, but I think Jesu is at least decent. I don't think like he's super bad. Janak is a very good player. So if they didn't have this kind of weird situation with things that actually left the team during the offseason and they kept the jungle, I think they could be even competing with Misfits, because this team was playing decent in the spring split. So if they just when you get 5 rookies, or rookies sophomore, I would say, it's 5 bets. And it's too much, right? Like, yes. It's combined bets, right? You're just like trying to have like min-maxing as much as you can. And they had like 4 out of 5 that worked and is working fairly well, or at least much better than expected. But all it takes is one player that's actually not making it. And eventually the whole project feels like a failure. Whereas I think that if they kept these 4 players next year and they actually got a jungle that match exactly what they want to do within the game, they could actually be a top 5 tier contender, because their players are all very good individually.
Yeah, basically the analogy there that he was using, the Zabatine, is like the premise of, like, in betting, it's called a parlay, isn't it? It's where you do a bet where they all compound. So like basically, it's a famous in European football, you do this, where they'll give you like a couple of good games, but then obviously they give you a couple that are mega unlikely. But, you know, if you get all 5, in English we call them an accumulator, like you have to get all 5. But the idea is if you get all 5, obviously the odds go mental, and it might be like, you know, like 50 to 1. But the reason it's 50 to 1 is, even if you get 4 out of the 5, the 5th one's like the insane hard one. So I agree with the premise, by the way. I also say the same thing about rookies. If you bring in a rookie, bring in like 2. Don't bring in 4. What the odds all 4 work out at once, and don't cause problems with each other? That's madness. What were you going to say, Wicked?
No, I just want to say, I think that the original SK lineup was actually decent. I think they had some opportunities, as Sabine also said. And I also think Tuns was a really good jungler, so it didn't really make any sense for me with the roster change they made. And now after seeing the roster change that they've actually made, and then roster changed again, it just seems like it's a complete kindergarten when SK right now in the management. And I think they don't even know what they're doing. So they're just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping it works and sticks somewhat.
I also say this because the elephant in the room that never gets talked about in this SK case is it is about Jesus. Like, he is the coach and he is the one who made some of these moves. And you look at his career, he has made these moves in like 3 different fucking orgs now. So what I would say is this. I actually think if you ever talk to him, he clearly does know like quite a lot about the game. He has an interesting perspective as a coach. I think he is trying to do some unique things. But my problem is this. Unlike a lot of other coaches who absolutely fairly can say, I didn't have full control, or I didn't get to pick the players, for example. As far as I can tell, he said as much, has been involved in picking the players and choosing who gets in the lineup and subbing people. So I will say, at the end of the day, you have to take the results on the chin, because if you're doing that and you're getting to actually have a lot of say, presumably if you'd have succeeded, you'd have wanted credit, right? That's totally fair. If you'd have actually built this team and made worlds or something, we'd have to say you're the genius who made the team. But it also means if the team completely fails, you also have to take a lot of the blame, unfortunately. That's just the nature of when you get to have a lot of input, in my opinion. Because my problem is this, Sabatine. People are going to think when I say all that I'm saying like, oh, don't do this. No, I want coaches to have that control. Yeah, it's going to have cases like this where it won't work out, but at least in that sense, I know that he got to do exactly what he wanted to do. You know, what his vision was for these players, this aspect of the game. If every coach had that, we'd be in a way better space in the scene, in my opinion, than because I know some of the orgs, like LCS is notorious for this, where they might let the fans think the coach did everything, but he might have had very little say in who they recruited or whether he could sub a player or all sorts of factors. What do you think, Sabatine?
I think that the problem in LCS is usually the liquidity of liquidity, not in terms of money, because it's one aspect, but as well like the amount of player with a specific profile that you want. You want a
Right.
hyper carry ADC? How many do you have? You want a very selfless mid laner? How many do you have? You want a very resourceful mid laner? How many do you have? Like that's the problem. You already eat
Sure.
the market, and you know you have like a list of 3 or 4 names with the profile you want, and they're already hired. And then you're gonna have to knock on the door of a specific team and like buy the buyout. So the liquidity, right, which is the amount of interchangeable pieces, is very very low. Like you have very few players with a specific profile. So that's one problem already. Meaning that even if you have the vision, you don't always have the chance to get the type of the player you want or the type of player you want. And on top of that, yeah, I mean, then there is the vision, because you have to associate in LCS especially that for every single thing you want to get, you're gonna pay more for it, right? It's not like in EU you want, I don't know, like you want a young promising mid laner right now. I can give you 4 names that you can try, and you're not gonna pay a lot. So if you're a coach and you have a vision that you want a rookie in mid lane, you're gonna get one, and it's not gonna cost you a lot. In NA, not only you might not find one, and if you find one, you might have to go and call your investors to get it. So it's completely different,
war.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's completely different. So obviously, I don't blame the management for that, because it is just a different industry. Because rarity, right? It's just bid and ask. If there was 20 times more players in NA, the individual price of player would just drop.
Yeah, supply and
because of the
demand.
competition, right?
Yeah.
And from that, it's not like I don't put it out of management. Don't let their players, their coaches make the decision, but it's more so within the decision of management and coaches. You have so many variables that nobody has control over, except if you just like inject Jeff Bezos money into your team. Obviously, nobody ends up having exactly the team they thought about, except if you are like a team that have something else to offer, which is usually already the teams that are in the top.
Yes.
Whereas in EU, you can really find, like, if you're good at scouting and you're in EU, you can make a team that looks like what you want, even though they're not like individually the most skilled. You can really make a team that will look like something. Misfits is one of them. I think SK Spring Split was one of them. I think Vitality is one example, and they don't even have the same playstyle, and they don't even have the same strength. They are just different vision of League of Legends.
This video was kindly supported by Eddie, Kris with a K, Lager15, Shenlong, Wisetown, Zachary Carter, Zack Schmidt, ochs, Alexander Rao, Animosity, Kris, Dean Tanglis, Doomseer, ErikHillestad, Hades, Jdubs, Jensen Goh, John Shelton, Joseph Ginsburg, Kovacevicd, Tobias Bernasconi, Zoomba, Zyrathenia, Bot Pounder 420, and a special thanks, as always, goes out to Jerky's Minion. Would you like to suggest a topic or guests to come on my shows? Do you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs where I might even insult you in a funny or maybe obnoxious manner? Do you want teasers for my upcoming content, things I'm thinking of, what I might be changing? Do you want to take part in one of those long discussions where we go all over the place with the big donators? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is using the Patreon link in the description box below to join the Screwluminati today.